For the second special episode of Children of Heroes, we flew to the Jersey Island, where we interviewed Sergeant Charles Gad Strasser.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. It's my great pleasure and honor to have the opportunity to interview one of our heroes, and I would love to know much more about your life. I know you were born in a kibbutz, but
yes.
Your parents moved to Czechoslovakia
when I was 4 months old.
Do you know
in a Moses
the
basket.
reason for
They didn't, the climate there didn't suit them, so they wanted to go back to Czechoslovakia, which they did, and I was 4 months old, and I'm told I was taken back to Czechoslovakia in a Moses basket. And then we lived in Czechoslovakia, as it was at that time, until the clouds from a possible Nazi occupation started coming. So my parents sent me to England on my own. And that was my first connection with Rotary, because a Rotarian family adopted me in England. And I lived with them for a year, and I was one of the lucky ones, because my parents were still able to get out before the war started. So then I went back to live with my parents.
It means your parents put you on one of these Kindertransports organized by Sir Nicholas Winton?
It was Kindertransport, but not one of the ones organized by him.
I see.
It was another one.
In 1938?
Yes, in 1938. And I remember well leaving Wilsonové nádraží, bye-bye. And it was a condition of the British government at that time that you had to be able to come to England, you had to find a sponsor who was prepared to pay a £50 payment and guarantee to keep you until you were 18 years old. And this Rotarian family in Bury in Lancashire did that for me. I stayed there and obviously didn't speak a word of English, but I went to a little village school, and in no time at all, when at that age you learn very quickly. And within a year I was the top of the class in English. So.
Congratulations. Do you remember what it was like to leave the family as 11
Well, at that age you don't realize.
No.
For me it was an adventure. My parents also still helped 9 other children from friends of theirs to also come over. And the city of Stoke-on-Trent, where we came to, was very generous, and they provided in one of their orphanages a house where all these 9 Czech children came and stayed and grew up there. And they all went, when the war finished, they all went back to Czechoslovakia. But I was the only one whose parents were in England, so I stayed in England.
And you joined the Czechoslovak army in the UK in 1944?
Yes.
What led you to this decision?
I wanted to help to win the war. No, I was, in those days it was very patriotic. So I joined in the embassy and then did my training in Southend, and then went straight to the unit in Dunkirk and stayed there as a motorcycle dispatch rider. The Czech hospital and the Czech headquarters was in Saint-Omer. And so I was in a village called Herzl. The whole of my unit, we were in a French chateau, my small unit. And I just went every day from there to Saint-Omer for one reason or another, to get orders and what have you. So it was an interesting time. I was still only 17, 18. And I took a convoy from Dunkirk back to Prague, not to Prague, can't remember where I'll think of it in a minute. But anyway, there are the different trucks, lorries that I took, I think about 50 lorries, and there were about three dispatch riders and taking it in turn to lead the convoy. And by the time we finished, I was the only one. The other two, either one of them the motorcycle didn't want to go any further, and the other one was crushed and didn't make the journey. And so, of course, now, whenever they do a reenactment, I join them, and I'm the only genuine soldier veteran there. All the others are in Czech uniforms and battle dress and so on.
You were part of the Czechoslovak delegation to the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg.
Because I joined the Czech army in England, I was entitled to be demobilized in England. The whole brigade went to Pardubice, to a very old First World War, I think. Barracks, a terrible, terrible place. And I really didn't join the army to be in a peacetime barracks in military routine in Pardubice. I was taking a leave, but it was very easy in those days in a military uniform to hitchhike across Europe. So that's what I did. And when I got in my hitchhike, when I got to Nuremberg, the Americans there had allied club. All the staff from the trials went to this club. American guy said to me, why don't you come to the trials and have a look? Here's a ticket. I went to the trials. It was very interesting with Goering and Hess and all the others, right, invisible. And then I thought, hey, instead of my waiting all the time, in that time I was already in Plzeň, waiting to be transported, to be demobbed. So I thought, hey, this would be a nice place to wait for my time. So there was a Czech war crimes delegation at Nuremberg under General Etcher. So I knocked on the door and I said, I can see you're very short-staffed here. It would be nice to join you. They said yes, and he gave me a letter to my commanding officer. And the following week, I was a member of the Czech delegation to the International Military Tribunal. And so I was there the whole time until they were hanged. So quite a lot of people I helped to get back to Czechoslovakia, as it was at that time, to be tried for their war crimes there. So I did my bit in bringing justice in Nuremberg. We were billeted in a part of the town that wasn't bombed to smithereens. The Americans called it Boys Town. I was there with GIs. I was the only Czech guy there. Also in that billets were the official military photographers from the trials, and also the crew chief of DC-3 aeroplane for the American Chief Justice there. He never used it. He didn't like flying. And so this aircraft obviously had to do some training flights. So we used his DC-3 flying all over Germany. So that's where I got my interest in flying and also my interest in photography, both of which I used in my civilian life when I came out of the army. When I came out of the army, I went back to Stoke-on-Trent, which is where we used to live. So I got a job as an assistant in a photographic shop. And then there was a professional photographer in the twin town of Stoke-on-Trent, which is Newcastle-under-Lyme. And I thought, it's about time that I did something on my own. So I was a very cheeky and very forward young man. And I said, I would like to buy your business. And he said, it's not for sale. And about 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from his daughter. We would like to talk to you. And then I started as a professional photographer in Newcastle-under-Lyme. And then I always used to do photographic Christmas cards. Some of the Christmas cards I used to use.
And when did you buy your first camera?
Oh, now that's interesting. When I was in Nuremberg, as being attached to the American Army, I got all the privileges, one of which was to get the 200 cigarettes a week at the PX, Post Exchange. And this was, in those days, cigarettes were money for bartering with. And that's when I got my first camera in exchange for cigarettes. Yeah. And then I started wholesaling photographic equipment. And then I went with my wife on a holiday to Switzerland. I was also doing, besides the photography, I was doing developing and printing for about 20 chemists and other photographic shops in the area. So I'd built up quite a nice business. And on the way, we went to Wiesbaden in Germany, So I went into a photographic shop there and I said, I'm a photographer and photographic dealer from England. Are there any photographic manufacturers here? I'd like to see how cameras are made. And he says, yes, there's one up there. And so I went there. It was Kammerwerke Gebrüderwerke in German. And one of the brothers was there. I must have been really forward because I said, it's not possible to import cameras at the moment in England because there's no money, no exchange control. But one day it must become possible to do so. And let's be ready and be the first one to import your cameras in a camera-starved market in England because they hadn't got new cameras since the beginning of the war. And I said, you got nothing to lose if I'm not performing for you, as you want to, and find somebody else, but we'll be the first. And he said, okay, let's do that. So I'd got an agency from a German camera manufacturer for the whole of the UK. When I got back, I started looking out for freelance sales representatives to cover the country. But I did a lot of it myself to start with. You couldn't import cameras straight away. They were on allocation quotas because of currency. So the first imports were allowed with a value of a camera up to £5. I got my first order and sold them obviously within minutes because there's been a shortage of cameras. And then they decided, the Board of Trade, that you could also import photographic accessories. And besides making a camera for £5, a very simple camera, they also made a more expensive camera with a coupled rangefinder. So, and accessories were freely importable. So we got a scheme where he took the rangefinder out of the camera, and rangefinders you could import separately. And I imported the cameras and the rangefinders, and then I set up a little assembly line in my studio in Newcastle-under-Lyme, and we put, to everybody else's amazement, we got more expensive cameras in to sell to dealers than any of my competitors. And then, of course, when the Japanese came along, I got an agency for Minolta cameras, and I was their agent for the UK for 26 years. So I went to Japan quite a lot, and the Far East generally, and I started importing things under my company's own brand name and built up four separate companies with 4 separate sales forces. And then we got to the stage where we were making enough annual profits to be able to get a London Stock Exchange quotation, and the company went public. After 12 years of that, another company came along and made an offer to take us over. And instead of having just paper shares, I now got money. So then I bought a house here in Jersey as a holiday home initially, and then I was able to retire here. And the only way I leave here now is, I'm very happy here, only way I leave here is horizontally.
What was the reason for your success?
I love challenges. The more bureaucratic the challenge is, the better I like it. And then I also got my pilot's license. And then I got my commercial pilot's license. And then I bought a twin-engined aircraft. First I had a single-engined aircraft. And that's my model of my twin-engined aircraft, the 6-seater twin-engined.
You've been flying until recently?
Yes, until I was 93, that's 3 years ago. I still passed all you had to do annual flying exams, particularly for your instrument rating to fly blind. And I passed all my flying exams, but I couldn't tick all the boxes on my medical to get your license. So I got my license revoked when I was 93, 3 years ago.
What do you like most about flying?
Oh, you are king of the universe. To be up there, it's very interesting. The first time you do your solo fly, the instructor sends you, you've done about 14, 15 hours, and he says, okay, go on your own now. You're up there. And you say, what the hell am I doing up here? But anyway, you make a good landing, and after that, it's no problem. And I did a lot of business in Europe, so I used it for business flying as well. When the wall came down, the Berlin Wall, I was at Photokina exhibition in Cologne, together with Ian Rosewell. And we said, the wall's come down. That means whilst the wall was there, only 3 airlines were allowed to fly from the west to Berlin, and that was Pan American, British Airways, and Air France. And then suddenly the wall came down, so we said, well, we must be able to fly because it's all one Germany now, and we were going to go together. But when I got to the airport, I got a little note on my windscreen to say he'd already left. So he was the first private plane to land in Berlin, and I was the second, but he was the first single engine and I was the first twin engine. So the German customs man came and he said, you got to declare and where are you from and all this. I said, we don't have to do any of that. You're now part of one Germany. Within Rotary, there are recreational fellowships, one of which is Rotarians who fly. So I joined the Flying Rotarians and I then became their first world president some years later as well. And the Flying Rotarians organized in the different countries fly-ins. So I've done a lot of, joining other Flying Rotarians all over in different countries in Europe. And as soon as it was possible to fly to Prague, I flew there. Yeah, and then I've been flying regularly back. And the Letňany airfield, they were always greeting me as a VIP visitor. And there's a portrait of me inside the control tower there now. These are my medals, and the one on top is the one that I was given. Minister of Defense gave it to me. It's a war cross, and then he said 3rd class. And I said, why only 3rd class? He says, well, you have to wait until you get a 1st class. And this is my toilet and cloakroom downstairs, and I collect baseball hats, and I've got over 100 different ones.
We are approaching the end of our interview. Is there anything you would like to add?
I've always wanted to climb mountains, and now I've stopped climbing mountains because I've lost my ability. Not my ability, I can still fly, but I'm not allowed to fly anymore now in my aircraft. So, I'm retired but not expired.